Gentlemen, anybody who follow my trades and looking to trade British pound time, I'm going to place an order to buy British pound at 136.49. Let's play order and let's see if I will have a chance to execute at this price. Okay, let's see what's going to happen in the next few minutes.
As opposed to trying to take breaks in the middle. I think that that'll just push off the situation a little bit, but actually could create other pent-up issues if you do close the markets.
We know that the President of the United States incited this insurrection, this armed rebellion against our common country. He must go. He is a clear and present danger to the nation that we all love.
Well, that was Speaker Nancy Pelosi after President Trump's unprecedented second impeachment. Now, all of the House Republicans and 10 Republicans voted to charge him with incitement of insurrection for the role he played in his supporters' attack on the Capitol. The charges next go to the Senate for trial. But a conviction is all but impossible before Joe Biden becomes president. Well, more on Washington throughout the day. Now, let's get straight to the Bloomberg Business Flash. Here in London with me is Laura Wright. Hi, Laura.
Thanks, Francine. Couche-Tard's $20 billion bid for Carrefour has hit a snag. The French government is opposing the deal, with Finance Minister Bruno Le Maire saying the pandemic highlights the importance of a country controlling its food supply. He says a rule on the screening of foreign investments could allow the government to block the deal. A trading app is warning it may have to restrict Bitcoin purchases this weekend. Retail platform eToro is fielding so much demand, it may have to put limits on buy orders for cryptocurrencies. Unlike stocks, cryptos trade 24 hours a day, and volume often surges at weekends when retail investors have more free time to play the market. Twitter is standing by its decision to ban President Trump. CEO Jack Dorsey says it was the right decision in the name of public safety, but he sees the move as a failure to promote healthy conversation on the platform. Meanwhile, Airbnb is cancelling reservations in the Washington area next week, a move designed to minimize any violence at President-elect Joe Biden's inauguration. The US is considering easing its restrictions on travel given new requirements on virus testing. The Centers for Disease Control and Prevention are discussing lifting curbs on flights from Brazil and the European Union.
I am moving a little bit higher my order to buy British pound at 136.495.
CEO Bill Winters. Sources tell Bloomberg that Simon Cooper, who runs the lender's investment bank and commercial operations, has been taking development and leadership courses to prepare him for the top job. No comment from Standard Chartered. Could space be the next big investment opportunity? Kathy Wood, head of ARK Investment, is launching a space ETF. The actively managed fund will track companies engaged in exploration and innovation. After massive inflows this past year, her once niche firm now oversees over $41 billion in ETF products. Renault is setting out goals for improving its profitability over several years and extending its cost cutting. The car maker is targeting a more than 3% operating margin by 2023 and returns of at least 5% 2 years after that. It comes as Renault is battling declining car sales and the expensive shift to electric vehicles. Bloomberg speaks with Renault's deputy CEO later today. The US is said to be dropping its plan to ban investments in Alibaba and Tencent. A source tells Bloomberg the Treasury Department blocked the move, removing the uncertainty hanging over Asia's two biggest companies. Officials also debated blocking search engine Baidu, but also dropped that plan. And that's the Bloomberg Business Flash. Francine.
Thank you so much. Now, Laura, we have quite a lot of data. We had the German data earlier on, and now we have a GDP forecast from the French finance minister saying that in 2021, 6% GDP growth target is within reach. Of course, the main story on France is what the government said with Carrefour. Our reporters on the ground are trying to figure out legally if the French Republic actually says no, Canada, Couche-Tard cannot come and buy Carrefour, what legal decree or explanation they'll do for that. Now, we also look at the markets. Treasury yields rising, stocks rising today after a report suggesting that President-elect Joe Biden plans COVID-19 relief of about $2 trillion. Now, Biden's advisors recently told allies in Congress about the cost of the package. That's according to the report, and Biden, of course, is expected to announce his economic support plans later today. I'm also looking at tech shares in Europe, banks, and automakers leading the gains. Now, Bloomberg surveillance continues in the next hour. Tom Keene joins me out of New York. We'll also look at what's going on in China. Alibaba and Tencent climbing after the U.S. decided against banning American investments in the Chinese tech giants. We look at China. We look at U.S. politics. We also look at Italian politics. We don't really quite know what the day will bring in terms of a possible new government or even a possible new prime minister. This is Bloomberg.
Another day of risk off across the financial markets. We bring you special coverage of all the price action and implications here on Bloomberg Television.
Impeached again, Donald Trump becomes the only president to be impeached twice. He now faces trial in the Senate. Treasury yields rise on a report that President-elect Biden plans a COVID relief package of about $2 trillion. His inauguration is in 6 days, and Italy's government risks collapse after Giuseppe Conte's junior coalition partner pulls out. Well, Well, good morning, everyone, and this is Bloomberg Surveillance. I'm Francine Lacqua in London, Tom Keene in New York. Tom, I think the story in politics, I mean, we have various political stories. Of course, it's about the U.S., about inauguration, but it also is having a huge impact on treasuries because this COVID relief package could be much bigger than the markets were expecting.
Yeah, that to me is a secondary story this morning, Francine, as the number is shifted on stimuli, and I mean that as a plural idea. I would say we've gone from a general zeitgeist of 1.2 trillion, 1.3 trillion, and getting out now to real conversation around the 2 trillion number, which tells me it's going to go higher than that.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at the markets, it's definitely repricing, and I think we'll have a bit more detail on Joe Biden's, economic plan today. What's important, Tom, is also how President-elect Biden shifts away the narrative from, Trump, almost hourly to what his policy will be, and that feels significant.
It's going to be a problem. Somebody asked me this morning about that, and I said, well, I don't know when the pardons come, but it's expected that the pardons come from President Trump. So, shifting the story from this historic moment in the United States is going to be a challenge.
Yeah, could the president pardon himself?
Don't know. Well, you're asking the wrong guy. It's way above my pay grade.
That's why we're getting Marty Schenker.
Yeah, exactly. Schenker has all the answers, but I would guess that it has been untested. It's an original idea, Francine.
Yeah, it certainly is. Now let's get straight to the Bloomberg First Word News in New York City. Here's Ritika Gupta. Hi, Ritika.
Morning, Francine, Tom. Well, now it is up to the Senate. The House put President Trump in the history books, impeaching him on a single charge of insurrection. It's the first time any president has been impeached twice. The resolution was supported by all Democrats and 10 Republicans. It now goes to the Republican-controlled Senate, which has refused a request to bring senators back and start the trial before next week's inauguration. Meanwhile, President Trump called on Americans to unite and avoid further violence. He spoke on a video released 1 week after his supporters stormed the Capitol. The president condemned the violence, and he said it goes against everything his movement stands for. He didn't mention the impeachment vote. President-elect Biden's advisors reportedly have told lawmakers a coronavirus relief plan will be in the $2 trillion range. That's according to CNN. Biden unveils a proposal today. It's said to include direct payments to American families and state and local funding. In China, the trade surplus hit a record high in December. Exports rose more than 18% in dollar terms from a year earlier. Demand for medical supplies and electronic goods surged in 2020. For the full year, the trade surplus was 27% higher.
Position opened on British pound. So you guys, if you place this order, right now you're on trade. So let's see how long it will take us to get profit from it.
Some sporting numbers. Yields, as Francine mentions, 2 basis point move back to 1.10 on the 10-year, but really pretty much a churn there. Oil churns, and currency markets give me no information. I do note sterling buttressed right up just under 137. Francine?
Yeah, Tom, I have to say there's a lot of news out there. Treasury yields, so rising, you mentioned that. It's all in suggestions that Joe Biden relief plan will be about $2 trillion. We also need to look at what's happening in Italy. Now, this is not something small. The Italian 10-year yield at 0.489. There's a government crisis, even a constitutional crisis. Given Italian politics and the way that it works, it's unclear whether we have a new prime minister, whether the current prime minister will have enough votes in parliament to form another coalition. So all up in the air at the moment. And then I did also want to spend a bit of time on Carrefour, because if you look at this French company, so yesterday it was up 10%, Tom, after a Canadian grocer wanted to make an offer on it. And now the government, the French government is trying to block it. So again, this is politics taking over M&A. The French finance minister, Bruno Le Maire, saying Carrefour is a strong company and can also improve its model. But back to our top story, and Donald Trump was impeached for a historic second time yesterday. 10 House Republicans joined Democrats in charging the president with incitement of insurrection for his role in the Capitol riots. Now, the Speaker of the House speaking to Congress yesterday.
He must go. He is a clear and present danger to the nation that we all love.
Joining us now is Bloomberg's Marty Schenker, who oversees all of our coverage. Marty, first of all, good morning. But when you look at what yesterday was, did it just show us the division within the Republican Party and how difficult it will be for them to take a stance against Donald Trump?
Yeah, well, there's no question the Republican Party is divided, but what it did show, actually, is that you had 10 Republican representatives cross over with the Democrats to vote to convict. That is, I mean, it may seem like a small number, but it is the most bipartisan impeachment vote ever taken in the United States. And so it does show that there's a block of Republicans who are willing to vote against this president. And the question is, what happens in the Senate now?
Yeah, what happens, largely to the Republican Party? I know you say it's significant, but it's 10 out of 211 representatives, I believe. Yeah,
it's not that many. But I do think that the battle lines have been drawn between McConnell's Republican Party and Donald Trump's Republican Party. Mitch McConnell has said he's not displeased with the House impeachment action, but he has not said whether or not he would vote to convict. On the other side, Donald Trump released a video last night, which was, very full-throated condemnation of violence. There's reporting that his closest aide said he must do it to avoid legal problems once he leaves office. So it's unclear. Meanwhile, the Republicans who support Trump seem to think that his actions last week have no impact on their support.
Marty, good morning. Did we learn anything about the phrase Cass Sunstein writes about so brilliantly in his book, Impeachment? Can't say enough about it, folks. High crimes and misdemeanors. What a wonderful phrase. They were a great band. They did Emerson, Lake and Palmer like no one. Did we identify yesterday high crimes and misdemeanors?
Well, there's no question that sedition and incitement for insurrection are very strong words. Unlike the first impeachment, where the question of whether or not these represented high crimes was fully debated, this one I think would be very difficult to counter. So the question is, what is going to happen in the Senate trial? Will Donald Trump send people for his defense if there is, and who would those persons be? Would Rudy Giuliani actually show up in the Senate to defend Donald Trump? Would be quite a show.
You and I remember, Marty, when Gore Vidal transfixed this nation from Aaron Burr out to Lincoln and beyond to the 1876 and the Reformation. There's a point in Lincoln where you understand Washington was at risk of being taken. And they had soldiers in Washington protecting across the Potomac to what was then Robert E. Lee's mansion. What is the symbolism to you of all these soldiers at the Capitol, as Bloomberg brilliantly yesterday in their headline alludes back to the Civil War?
Well, it's a symbol of the division within this country that forces us to deploy troops in order to protect our democracy.
Is it a separation of the South and the North? And I don't mean the romance of South Carolina and all the movies that we know, but are we setting up a new divide with the Deep South?
It's hard to say that that's the case, because the people who stormed the Capitol came from all over this country, and there are pockets of conservatism and even white supremacy in New York State as much as there is in Alabama. So it is an urgent question for the United States. How do you bring these people who think that storming the Capitol is an expression of democracy back into the mainstream?
Marty, how does Joe Biden try and regain the airwaves to talk about policy?
Well, today he's going to introduce his economic plan, which some people speculate could be as high as $2 trillion. Clearly, Joe Biden wants to bring the discussion back to bringing the country together and to work with Republicans to get a stimulus plan. That conflicts with a Senate trial. And, if they move immediately to a trial under Senate rules, that's the only thing they can do. And he has to make a determination whether he wants the Senate to proceed with that.
Marty, thank you so much. Bloomberg's editor-at-large there, Marty Schenker. Now, coming up, we speak, of course, about fixed income. We talk about treasuries with Andrew Balls. He's PIMCO Global Fixed Income Chief Investment Officer. That's coming up shortly, and this is Bloomberg.
We have some good news in terms of vaccines and a chance to overcome the health crisis, but we are not there yet.
We need the fiscal stimulus, and we need it relatively quickly, because I can see where the second wave's coming. You can see consumer spending beginning to get impacted again.
What we need surveillance to be stronger. We need public health measures, because you have no other way at the beginning. This is your best weapon, and you need to use it well.
The good news is that both the vaccines and the therapeutics, in particular the antibodies, are coming along and will start to bring that number way down.
We don't just need more investment in public health. We must also rethink how we value health.
I do believe a targeted fiscal stimulus is going to be in order to really begin a more equalized economy.
Surveillance from New York, from London, a continued story of Washington. We'll have much more on that through the day. Look for Kevin Cirilli sound on Coast to Coast tonight, the 5 p.m. hour. Of course, David Weston holding court on All in Washington at 12 noon today. Right now, we try to get back to normal, and normal is 12 and 14 and 15-page reports that compel to be read. That's usually the case at PIMCO with their great team, including Joachim Fels. Andrew Balls joins now, their CIO of Global Fixed Income. Andrew, I like the behavioral construct of the PIMCO report. I'm going to go back to a TV show long ago and far away on the police of, I believe it was Brooklyn. Be careful out there. And you make it very clear within the certitudes of 2021, we need to be careful. What does that mean?
Yes, no, I like your Hill Street Blues reference, if that's right. So markets have priced in a lot of good news, and this is the way markets work. It may look very difficult out there now in terms of COVID across the world, but the market looks forward to vaccination and the recovery. And we forecast a strong recovery from the second quarter onwards, the strongest growth in a decade this year. But the markets have priced this in. If you look at particularly kind of equity markets, risk asset behavior. So as we say, we have a pretty optimistic view on the outlook, looking through this difficult first quarter. But be careful because there's a lot of risk and a lot of good news priced in.
The acclaimed concept of the new normal, it ages gracefully. People still talk about it all the time, Andrew, always citing PIMCO. Forget about it. What's the new normal at PIMCO?
So I think that construct has served us well. And if you just look at the level of interest rates and central banks anchoring the front ends of curves, then that has served us well. Looking forward, I think that as you look beyond this year, you start to see real uncertainty in terms of the outlook. And there's always uncertainty in the outlook. But plausible cases for higher inflation, but plausible cases for deflation, plausible cases for ongoing fiscal activism. We're talking about the Biden economic plan today, but also the potential for fiscal retrenchment. So I think, yes, we may have another year or so, another couple of years of the new normal to go. But as we look beyond that, I think as investment managers, we're going to be in a world with, what jargony kind of fatter tail risks, positive and negative.
But what's your take, Andrew? What's your feeling right now? Are we going towards, is this reflationary trade, does it have legs?
So I think the reflationary trade has legs in the near term, because I do think that, as dark as before the dawn, there is a lot of good news in terms of the progression on vaccines, and then there should be a lot of pent-up demand, so you can get to very strong growth outlooks. Central banks have told us that they're going to remain very supportive, and we expect that. It could be interesting when this gets challenged. The reflation runs into greater uncertainty on central banks later, but that's not going to be, I don't think, a story for this year. Probably, certainly not the 6 months to come. So yes, I think that there is further room to run. But that said, if you take treasuries, you are anchored by a Federal Reserve which is going to continue quantitative easing, tapering, possibly at the end of this year, but much more likely next year. Years to come before we have rate increases. Janet Yellen at the Treasury, somebody who's going to be working very closely, very supportive of the Fed. So in effect, you have yield curve control, not formal but informal, and I think that should be anchoring for fixed income yields. So if Treasuries go up too much further, then they will start to look attractive, even at relatively low yields compared with history.
So Andrew, where are you expecting the 10-year yield year end?
I think around these levels to let's say 1 to 1.5% would be reasonable. I think as an expectation, as we get confirmation of the sort of outlook that we're forecasting in our PIMCO outlook. But you do have that push and pull, lockdowns versus vaccines. I'm no medical expert. I think it makes sense for fixed income markets, for markets more generally, to look to the other side of the valley to price in the recovery. But once you've priced in all the good news, you're just left with a set of downside risks. Disappointment on fiscal as one example, scarring in the economy as another.
Well, you've mentioned that twice. We'll come back and sit on that. Andrew Ball's with us on the fiscal disappointment to come as he tries to look over the Biden Valley. He is with PIMCO, and we're thrilled he can stay with us this morning. Futures up 8, Dow futures up 114. A churn to the market. I'm going to say it's constructive. We'll see off of economic data. We are attuned to Washington. That will be our major focus today across all of Bloomberg News, but we cannot stop considering the economics of the moment. Mary Daly, I'll get it out, too early in the morning, 3, 2, 1. Mary Daly of the San Francisco Fed in the 11 o'clock hour. This is Bloomberg. Good morning.
This is Bloomberg Best, your weekly review of the most important business news, analysis, and interviews from Bloomberg Television around the world.
Ken Burns, welcome to Bloomberg Big Decisions.
We have always been a mixture of things. We are always stronger for that mixture.
Growth is a way to stay competitive, delight more and more consumers.
Are you worried that people won't take the vaccine?
We remain concerned about vaccine hesitancy.
What is one word of advice you'll take with you?
Learn how to listen. And that is certainly something that has served me well.
Ankiti, where do you go from here? It's a huge market, it's a huge opportunity. I want to go 100x from here.
Bloomberg has enhanced search on the terminal to deliver what you need when you need it. Now, you can simply type phrases in everyday English in the command line. Compare financials. Find people. Analyze markets. You can enter phrases or ask questions. What do you want to know today? Ask a question or visit SearchGo to find answers now.
Mercedes-Benz is on a path towards CO2 neutral mobility. So we have flicked the switch there, and really we're going to step by step electrify everything. And what does that mean? Combustion engines get electrified.
This is a market that over the past few weeks has made it clear it wants to go higher. It got a little spooked by the idea that geopolitical tensions are rising.
This is Bloomberg Surveillance. I'm Francine Lacqua here in London. Tom Keene in New York. Tom, we were having a good conversation about treasuries. I know you want to come back and talk about Andrew Balls of PIMCO still with us. I know you want to talk to him maybe even about negative rates. But before we go to all of that, Andrew, there is another constitutional crisis in Italy if the government falls. I think it would be the 72nd government or thereabouts in about 78 years.
I was going to say 72nd, right the 72nd government since what, Christmas? I mean, it's amazing, Francine. Come on.
It is amazing, but actually, for once, it's difficult for an American to criticize Italian politics. Andrew, what exactly do you do with Italian yields?
Touche. I think that Italian yields have benefited a lot from the ECB policy and from the fiscal support of the fund, and so you've seen the rally we've seen over the past 9 months. I think here, I'm tempted to say it's kind of business as usual. Another risk to the Italian government. I think it's very unlikely you are going to have another election because the incumbent says they really don't have much an incentive to have an election. It would open the door to Lega. And supported by the far right party. So I don't think that's likely. Mr. Renzi leads a tiny little party. I guess politicians, it's their job to get attention. But my expectation is that the coalition, maybe with some reformulation, maybe some support from the Berlusconi MPs continues. But it's a reminder, I think, with Italy, there's always going to be that fragility.
Andrew, I want you to take a page from the wonderful and missed Samuel Britton, or even the great work of John Plender at your Financial Times of years ago. And the idea is, if we look out into the mist and we know this fiscal debt is coming, massive fiscal debt, can we actually see when the tip point is where it becomes a challenge?
Well, I think it's really important to focus on the low funding rate. So if you look at debt service costs, even with higher, on the government side, this is, even with higher government debt, the service costs are not problematic. And in the case of Italy, This is particularly important, but in general, this is important. So I think it means that central banks are going to remain pretty wedded to the fiscal authorities, that you're going to have forms of ongoing yield curve control in effect to maintain the stability and create the room for much needed fiscal support as we're going to see in terms of the Biden proposal. I think where it gets difficult would be in the future in the world of rising interest rates. So say, for example, you did have upside inflation pressures. That's where some of these, the monetary fiscal partnership potentially gets harder.
Thank you so much. Andrew Balzer, PIMCO Chief Investment Officer of Global Fixed Income. Now, coming up on Bloomberg Surveillance simulcast, Jeffrey Curry, Goldman Sachs, Global Head of Commodities. That's coming up 1:30 p.m. in London, 8:30 a.m. in New York. This is Bloomberg.
我开始做直播是在今年年初的时候，那主要是去年的话，我们参加更多的是线下的活动。今年大家都知道，由于中国的这个疫情，导致这些线下活动不能办了，所以更多的交流方式在线上。就今年春节之后，主要是开始在线上通过直播的方式跟粉丝进行交流。直播可能对于投资者来说是陪伴投资者，大家讲讲市场啊，讲讲投资的心理啊，这样的话就可以让大家在投资的时候，心情更平缓。平缓的话，能做到长期持有；长期持有的话，才可能赚钱。相对而言，线上可能覆盖的人群更多，因为可能疫情，很多人在家里看直播的人更多。反而可能，我这个工作可能是反而是受益于疫情的一个工作吧。
明天希望高开赚钱，
祝大家赚大钱。
Give you a sense of the real-time action, the 10-year yield tumbling now 11 basis points, so continuing in this knee-jerk risk-off feel.
This is Bloomberg Surveillance. I'm Francine Lackley here in London. Tom Keene in New York. Tom, Italy's government at a risk of collapse. The former premier, Matteo Renzi, pulled his party's ministers from the ruling coalition, attacking Prime Minister Giuseppe Conte for failing to do enough to tackle the country's problems. Well, joining us to make sense of this, to look at the various scenarios and what happens next, is Silvia Merler, Algebris Policy and Research Forum Head of Research. Silvia, as always, thank you for joining us. When you look at the various possibilities, how unlikely is it that, first of all, fresh elections are called for?
Hi, Francine. Thank you for having me. So I would say election is really an extreme scenario right now because, well, for a number of reasons. First of all, it's a very delicate moment for the country, needless to say. So the President of the Republic, I think, would go to great lengths to avoid piling an election on top of a pandemic and an economic crisis that is still very much in the making. On top of that, the recent reform of Parliament implies that the confirmation of Parliament that would come out of that election would be very different and it would be smaller. So I think there also is a little political incentive on the side of the Parliament to anticipatedly end their terms. So I think it's very unlikely in my view.
Silvia, and you have a great, on Twitter, you have a great feed really explaining the possibilities. I tried to go through it with Tom and I lost his attention span. So, I mean, does this just go to the heart, because there are so many possibilities at the moment of a technocratic government, Prime Minister Conte staying in charge with a couple of other parliamentarians, but does this go to the heart of the problem of Italy's debt sustainability?
So I would say the two main possibilities actually right now are this government gets reshuffled and probably gets a different prime minister still of political extraction, or this is not possible. It's not possible to find a majority for that kind of solution. And so a technocratic...
Okay, traders, I'm going to place stop on profit for British pound at 136.51.5. Okay, to place stop on profit. So if it will get changed direction, we will sell without any losses. Okay, see you later, guys.
Issuance in 2021 and 2022 will be substituted for by European issuance. So that obviously puts this political crisis in a favorable environment compared to similar crises in the past.
Silvia, again, your feed is just phenomenal, and I learned so much. I go, fallimento, consultazione tra I partiti e il Presidente della Repubblica, and I got two choices, accordo politico or nessun accordo politico. Cut to the chase. If we have a Monti redo with Draghi, a technocratic solution, can the technocrats set up boundaries to bring order to the political chaos?
Well, theoretically, yes, in the sense that obviously the prime minister, be it a technocratic or a political prime minister, will have some ownership on the government and the parliament that will back him or her. The big question is whether in practice this is possible and for how long. If you look in the past at the experience of Mario Monti, who was a very skilled technocrat coming to power in a period where actually economic urgency was even stronger than the one that we're facing now in terms of the likelihood of Italy potentially losing market access back then. The boundaries were in place and they stayed in place for about a year, but then soon after, when the urgency subsided and the support from parties started also to be lower, and eventually it turned out into a government crisis again. So I would say yes, theoretically it's possible to set boundaries around what you can and want to do, but any government still needs the backing in Parliament to survive, and for how long this will be available, it's unclear, I would say, right now.
Silvia, first of all, a shout out to Tom, who I'm so glad his private Italian lessons have finally paid off, because he actually speaks with a decent Italian accent.
Fantastic, indeed.
Fantastico, Tom. In the next 6 months, Silvia, how important is it that Italy knows where to spend the recovery funds? Is it, if they're squandered in the next 6 months, does it put Italy back light years?
It is really hard to overstate how important this is. I mean, both for the country itself, because obviously the depth of the economic crisis is such that restarting growth and actually putting the country on a higher potential growth path is fundamental, but also for the entire European project, if you think about it, because this is the furthest that we have gone towards having some form of fiscal union, common EU spending, and very much of whether this will turn into a permanent feature of the European project is relying on countries doing the right thing for the money and spending them in a proper way, in an efficient way, in a transparent and accountable way. All things that, to be entirely honest, were not that part of the initial drafts of the National Recovery Plan, which is improved lately. Still requires some improvement, but in the next 6 months, it will really make the difference, not only in terms of Italy surviving or failing in the future, but also the European project turning into something more stable and strong.
Silvia, thank you so much. Silvia Merler there, Algebra's Policy and Research Forum Head of Research. Now let's get straight to the Bloomberg First Word News in New York City. Here's Ritika Gupta. Hi, Ritika.
Hi, Francine. President Trump has become the first president ever to be impeached twice. The resolution was approved by all Democrats in the House and 10 Republicans. The president was accused of 1 count of incitement of insurrection for last week's riot at the Capitol. The next move is up to the Republican-controlled Senate. It's already rejected requests to bring senators back early. Meanwhile, Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell says he hasn't decided whether to vote to impeach President Trump. McConnell sent a note to colleagues after reports that he had agreed to vote in favor of impeachment. He wrote that he intends to listen to the legal arguments before deciding. National Guard troops have taken up positions in the U.S. Capitol. More than 20,000 Guard personnel have been summoned. That's turned the Capitol and its park-like campus into an armed camp. Authorities say there's a major security threat around next week's inauguration, and they're trying to prevent a repeat of the riots at the Capitol. And in the UK, Prime Minister Boris Johnson warns that hospital intensive care units could be overwhelmed. That's after the country hit its highest daily coronavirus death toll since the pandemic began. Johnson said there is a very substantial risk of intensive care capacity being exceeded, and he urged Britons to follow lockdown rules to curb the spread of the disease. Global news 24 hours a day on air and at Bloomberg Quick Take, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. I'm Ritika Gupta. This is Bloomberg. Tom?
Amy, thank you so much, Ritika. Greatly appreciate that. We move on from the history of this impeachment to January 19th, and of course the Senate's return to Washington. Amy Pope, Chatham House, frames out for the president-elect his path to January 20th. Futures up to yields move 1.11% in the 10-year. Early morning in Washington. This is Bloomberg.
I'm David Weston. Bloomberg Television is reinventing one of the most iconic brands in financial television for a new audience. Join me to see the news program for the clever investor. This is Bloomberg Wall Street Week.
Access the financial world on demand. Hear from leading economists, policymakers, and industry experts via live and on-demand webinars, only from Bloomberg. Start exploring to see what's moving the markets. Visit Bloomberg.com webinars.
Their CPG history, their experience, and really how we might be able to combine together to really create this fantastic public company. And so we kind of got into the SPAC thing a little bit before it became such a hot method of going public.
know that the President of the United States incited this insurrection, this armed rebellion against our common country.
There's no way this helps the nation deal with the tragic and terrible events of last week that we all condemn.
If we impeached every politician who gave a fiery speech to a crowd of partisans, this Capitol would be deserted.
He must not remain in power one moment longer.
We must impeach and remove this president.
If inciting a deadly insurrection is not enough to get a president impeached, then what is?
Nearly half the country supports our current president. This takes their voice away.
A vote to impeach will further fan the flames of partisan division. That doesn't mean the president is free from fault.
And he is capable of starting a civil war. He must be impeached.
This threat must be extinguished immediately.
Last week there was a domestic threat at the door of the Capitol, and he did nothing to stop it. I will vote yes on these articles of impeachment.
An important vote there from the gentleman from Washington State, Mr. Newhouse, joining another Washington State colleague and 10 Republicans in voting against their president. Extraordinary moments. Thanks so much to our team for putting that together through the night, the voices of impeachment. Joining us now, Francine Lacroix in London, Tom Keene in New York, Amy Pope of Chatham House, who has a unique set of qualifications to talk about this historic moment. Amy, I want to fold in here your international experience with the response of big business. Big business, including the city of New York, is pulling away from Mr. Trump and his supporters. There's no question about that. Do you perceive it as an interim moment, or is there a permanence to how business will disassociate themselves from a certain part of the Republican Party?
Well, that actually might hinge on impeachment. If the president himself is impeached, then he is going to have a hard time getting support from any business in the future at any point. Otherwise, I think, business is pragmatic. They're going to be looking at who's in charge at what moment in time. Right. They're identifying the fact that the Senate and the House and now the president, they're all Democrats, and that there has been a turning point. So, I think this is an interim moment, really. They just can't stand with what has been a really horrific and shocking week in the face of.
I'm going to move my stop on profit further. And I'm going to move to 136.54.5. Okay?
Constituency of the Trump supporters is louder and seems to be better organized. Certainly they're getting a lot more airtime. And so that is putting a tremendous amount of pressure on the members of Congress who we would traditionally expect to support a more traditional conservative Republican agenda.
Amy, what's the state of the Republican Party right now? I know we talk about divisions, we talk about possible splitting, but given the votes yesterday, and I know a lot of commentators say 10 representatives from the Republican Party voting against the president was brave, but this is 10 out of 211 of them.
I think the Republican Party has a lot of work to do in the coming days. They need to figure out where their center is and whether or not the tent can be big enough to accommodate the traditional business and traditional conservative Republicans, along with the more populist wing of the party. And right now, those factions are very much in tension. We know that, Mitch McConnell has clearly been leaking to the press that he's done with the president, but that doesn't mean that the Republican Party is done with the president. And so they need to figure out how they're going to take the moment and move forward. And there's no clear answer.
What do you think will happen?
I think ultimately the conviction in the Senate won't happen. I think Republicans will become too afraid of the price that they'll pay at the ballot box in the future. They know that there's still a lot of support for the president, and they're not going to want to sacrifice their own political and professional goals.
Amy, a philosophical question. You're real good at this. I mean, you're channeling Robin Niblett. I understand that. And that is the great distrust of conservatives is that if we spend a lot of money at the government, it will be ill-spent or inefficiently spent or misspent. How do you spend $2 trillion and do it in a good way?
That's a bigger question than I have time to answer right now. But I think, you know, this is a moment in time where people all across the world, and including in the United States, are really struggling. And what we're seeing is a pretty significant difference in approach to the problem. If you look here in London, for example, where I am, or across Europe and in the United States. And in the United States in particular, there's a sense that there isn't a safety net, and that the chasm beneath them is just growing larger and larger. And so I think that both parties need to come to terms with that and find a way forward through this really unprecedented moment in time.
Amy Pope, thank you so much. With Chatham House, our Associate Fellow of U.S. and America's program. Very, very interesting this morning. Terrific experience working for President Obama. I thought of him in the early morning, and I am so happy that David Weston will speak to him. It matters what the friend of Donald Trump says. Wilbur Ross, the Secretary of Commerce, balance of power with David Weston in the 12 noon hour. That's going to be an interesting conversation. This is Bloomberg.
Our generation's biggest problem.
Climate change is happening.
And the world's most innovative solutions.
Transport, industry, buildings, electricity, all of those things.
Everything you need to know about our changing environment, the politics of global warming.
We can and we will deal with climate change.
In the fight against climate change, Bloomberg Green has you covered.
It's really a reminder, isn't it, just how sensitive the markets are to any commentary about trade. We did see some pressure on the yuan, we did see some pressure on the futures. That is now being reversed.
This is Bloomberg Surveillance. I'm Rishika Gupta with your Bloomberg Business Flash. The owner of the animal supply chain store Petco raised $864 million in an IPO. The company is returning to the public market 15 years after it was taken private. Petco will continue to be controlled by the current owners, which include CVC Capital Partners. And Chesapeake Energy has won court approval for a reorganization plan that slashes about $7 billion in debt. In return, ownership is being handed over to senior lenders, including Franklin Resources. That caps a years-long effort to repair the company's finances. Chesapeake became bloated after repeated borrowing to fuel expansion. It entered bankruptcy last year. And that is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Francine.
Thank you so much, Ritika. Now, the UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson is warning that intensive care units could be overwhelmed as the country hit its highest daily coronavirus deaths toll since the pandemic began. This comes as J&J's experimental one-shot vaccine generated a long-lasting immune response in an early safety study. Well, we're delighted to be joined by Lucy McBride, Foxhall internal medicine physicians. And Lucy, thank you so much for joining us. I know you're also based in Washington, D.C., and I believe go to work every day, and so you see this firsthand. Lucy, when you look at this one-shot vaccine, how initial is the initial stage? So how quickly could it be approved if everything goes to plan? And how much of a game changer would this actually be?
It's a great question, and good morning. Thanks for having me. You know, a one-shot vaccine would really be a game changer. As you know, we're struggling with vaccine rollout and with administrative snafus everywhere you look. And so if you could have just one shot instead of two, we'd do a long way to achieve herd immunity. If the vaccine looks as good as it does so far, and it gets approved as soon as, next month, that would accelerate the ability to get most people the immunity they need to be able to open up their lives, to open up the economy, and also to curb this extraordinary surge in the number of the cases in this country.
Lucy, what's the biggest problem in terms of vaccination right now? Is it people that don't want the vaccine? Is it not enough vaccine doses? Is it two dosage, or is it just the, freezing method you need to be able to keep it?
So there are probably three main problems with the vaccine rollout right now. Number one is that, unfortunately, we're asking the busiest people in the country right now, hospital workers, to administer a lot of these doses. We really need to work on getting pop-up vaccination sites outside of hospitals and get like a core of people who are not already busy taking care of very sick patients to get the shots into people's arms. Secondly, the supply is not big enough. That's why we're trying to decide whether to give more people one shot instead of fewer people the two-shot series, which is, of course, what has been studied with these in the trials. And then three, there is vaccine hesitancy that's very, very real. One of the things I talk about with my patients every day is, I'm trying to dispel myths and separate facts from fears, because there are some very real fears, and naturally people have concerns. It's important to note, however, that most people who have questions and concerns about the vaccine are not anti-vaxxers. They have natural concerns about a new vaccine. And so it's important to field those questions and try to help people understand what the facts are.
It's a joy to speak to you, Dr. McBride, because you're in the real world. Folks, as you fly into Reagan and you come down the Potomac, just before Georgetown is where Sibley Hospital is, you fly right over where Dr. McBride practices. I am surprised that we are not distributing the vaccine through doctors' offices, because I remember that in my youth with the cold liquid nitrogen thing in the corner. Are we constrained by the refrigeration? Are we constrained by the technocracy of these new vaccines where we can't get it in the private offices of people like you?
Well, that's exactly right. The vaccine requires, extreme refrigeration and freezing. And then, not every doctor's office has the ability to have that kind of, machinery. Moreover, one of the problems with, for example, the Moderna vaccine is that every vial has 10 doses in it. It's not single dosed. So when you crack open a vial of the vaccine, and you only have 2 people on your schedule to give the vaccine to, and your pharmacy is about to close, you have to waste doses. So what we also need is a waiting list of people at the ready to be able to accept those vaccine doses. We have a lot of work to do administratively to get these things out there into people's arms.
Are you waiting for what Peter...
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, position closed at 136,545. So you made a profit. Well done.
8,000 Americans dead from COVID-19. I mean, we need as many vaccines as possible. It takes a lot of shots on goal to get it right, and we've been extremely fortunate to have two very effective vaccines. But if we could get one that's single dose, doesn't require a lot of refrigeration, we'd be a lot better off.
Did you see, Francine, how Dr. McBride does that? She gets the Washington Capitals into it in a heartbeat with V.V. Chara resurrecting his career with the Capitals right now. Shots on goal. That's a Washington hockey talk right now. Dr. McBride, thank you so much with Foxhall and Turnus in the real world of getting the vaccine out to us. On the markets, with futures up 3, Dow futures up 79. Francine and I watching yields higher here on the migration to $2 trillion in stimulus. And, it'd be good, Francine, to frame out within all this maelstrom